Velkommen til dag 2 av Norsk Planmøte. I'll take this in English. We are so lucky to have Marcel Smets here. Marcel was the chief developer of the widely published and high praised transformation of the area around Leuven station in Belgium, and also the Antwerp station. Smets is a professor emeritus in the Catholic University of Leuven, and he also is a visiting professor in the University of Thessalonica and of the Harvard University. During this fall, Smets has collaborated with the Institute of Landscape and Architecture, discussing infrastructure and the urban project as an instrument of transforming the city with the third-year students of Landscape and Urbanism of Architecture working on Hamar. The students will present this work during the planning meeting later today in a short brief, and in an exhibition in Hamar, which is B-Lab, is opening the 10th of December, where also the lectures during the fall, where Smets has been involved, will be exhibited. So today we will talk about the urban project, where the project is used as an instrument or a mean to transform the city without outside its own limits. And I would like to say welcome to Marcel. We are very happy to have you here, Marcel. I can see you, and I will thank you. And Marcel was here during last week discussing projects with the students, and we're very happy to have Marcel with us today. Thank you, Marcel.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Maria. Good morning, everybody. I'm very sorry not to be among you, but these means today allow a proximity which was not possible earlier. So I would like to entertain you this morning about 3 meaningful projects in my life. Not meaningful, not only because they actually cover the better part of my life. I mean, the Leuven project goes back beginning 30 years ago, the Nantes project like 10 years ago, and the Antwerp project, with which I want to end, is very recent. It's 2020. So, but they are not only meaningful because they give a sort of an image of what I've been trying to do in different associations designing and coaching these projects. But I selected the 3 of them because they are not just projects. These 3 projects have all been or are on the way of being implemented. So actually, I want to make a point for the feasibility of the urban project as a means of designing and directing infrastructural design. So the intention of this lecture would be to use these 3 successful case studies to investigate their reoccurring points of methodology and state these points of methodology as potential set of requirements and strategies to approach the urban project in general. So actually, I would like to start now as a sort of outset with what normally would be more or less the conclusions of a lecture, and put forward 4 steps or 4 conditions, which I think, looking back at these 3 projects, are rather essential, in fact, to have the success they were able to obtain. The first requirement is that you would that you would formulate a strong overall spatial concept that addresses both the general and the specific conditions of the site. It is not just these kind of concepts are not just generic, they are specific, they are contextual. And not only contextual on a smaller scale, but also on the scale of the city itself. Second point, second requirement is that concepts are not enough. They have to be developed into prospective models through an interactive exchange and project-driven research between the scale levels. Which means that if you have a concept, you have to test it. You have to test it over and over again on different scale levels in order to make it feasible and transform it into a reality project. Third element is that one has to secure that all major stakeholders do not only agree with the main design objectives, but become part of the design process as such. And the fourth is that it came about yesterday also in the lecture of Annemie de Buitenil-Benalt, the importance of safeguarding the intended design qualities of the urban plan into an executive project should be done by interacting with or monitoring the architect and or the infrastructural design office in charge of the implementation. So it is essential that somehow there is a continuity between, let's say, the person that or the office that has created the overall plan and the ones that are going to be in charge of the execution. So let's start out with the Leuven project, which goes back to the period 96-2001, at least the executive part, the implementation part. And as you see, for those who don't know it, it covers quite a, well, first of all, it deals with infrastructure. It is right situated around the station of Leuven, which you see here on the model, but it covers quite an area which basically, as you see, is reformulating the infrastructure in the proximity. It deals with the public space just as well as with the hard infrastructural space, a tunnel, a parking, and so forth. And as you see, it is something that has really been able, this is a very recent aerial photograph where you see that basically the project after 20 years is more or less finished. Now, to begin with, it started out with an analysis, and the analysis is clear that the line of the railway was like a tangent to more or less circular city, and that in between the one and the other, there was a large zone of city and infrastructural amenities, which were largely outworn and were ready to be changed. The whole thing at the outset, the whole area, I want to show you these old pictures, was rather chaotic in origin, prevailing, of course, the car traffic all over. So the general design ambition would be to domesticate this extended area of infrastructure and make it follow its urban vocations. That's why I like to use these before and after pictures from the same angle to see how much actually this project has changed the setting. With relation to the spatial concept, there is a few major ideas. One is, or the first would be, to blend the transition between the center and the outskirts of the city by transforming the rail station into a hub of collective transport, liberated from the transiting car traffic. So, as you see, it's an objective at the scale of the city region, where the line has sort of, in a hilly landscape, sort of passes through the city, and then gives way to a place where the outskirts and the historic city touch each other. That's where we want to make the liaison. And in order to do that, we have to sort of relieve this area from car traffic by directing the main flows around it. This directing around it, well, I cannot go into the details, obviously. This was done actually by using this whole sort of triangular traffic node which existed prior and condensing it into a real traffic plaza, which basically then gave way to one road coming from the outskirts and passing along the station, and so liberating actually the zone which was separating the historic city itself from the railway station. That is the first element. The other element of the junction, sorry, is of course the fact that you have to bring pedestrians and cyclists then from one to the other. And this is a main task, because it means that somehow we have to find a way of bringing people under the tracks and then back to the city, and change this passageway into a real urban street. Well, an urban street which would, of course, need the necessary light was the idea of the original concept, the necessary sort of ampleness, and the idea of the introduction into the city. Second main element of the concept was that there is an obvious linear directionality imposed by the tracks. And rather than denying it, the idea was to use it as a sort of a strengthening general idea for placing the major attractors of public activity on both ends of this linear development stretch, which then would allow to develop the intermediate space relatively easy, because there would be already a passage from the station through the attractors. And as you see, I mean, this is two aerial photographs, one of 2002, I think, and one more recent. And you see that this idea of the attractors that has led to the filling afterwards has been implemented. The third important idea was to differentiate the particular character of the central city and the suburban urbanity by creating a complementary opposition between the development on either side of the tracks. In this early model of 1994, 95, you can really see that we already foresaw a sort of a park vis-a-vis the developed side here on the old merchandise area of the railways, and that this opposition, but also this contact and this complementarity was, of course, not only important for the project as a whole, but for preserving the aspect of both city and suburb. And also here, we see that today, we have this development, and we have been able to keep open the park, which I will come back to, has been realized in the meantime. So From these original thoughts, we have to evolve to what I call an operational model through successive steps of design-oriented or investigation. Research by design, some call it, you know. And the idea is, of course, to test and to, by testing, you know, always make a step further from one project to the other and get to a closer definition and a closer acceptance by all parties. And then, of course, there is this whole idea of secure that the agreement of the major stakeholders by making them part of the design process. Again, I don't have time to go into it, but this project would have never been possible if we had not met over a period of 2 years every month with the high chief officials of the railways, of the city, of the Ministry of Public Works, of the bus company, each time proposing new schemes, new models, and trying to test how they were reacting, reworking it, and so forth and so on, in order to finally arrive not at a definite plan, but at a framework which still left the possibilities of, you know, interpretation and change of program as time went along. 20 years, any time of execution for an urban project is very long, and one can never foresee at the beginning what will happen. Anyway, what has been very important in this case is the fact that I have been able to safeguard the urban design quality by monitoring the successive steps of execution. This is a plan of 2002, where you already see, you know, the parts that were at that time under implementation, you know, let's say the major inner city urban ring, then basically the hub, you know, and then, you know, the big projects of the covering of the tracks, and then also the provincial headquarters. Now, all of these at the time, we were either directly connected to the implementation, or we were able to monitor it very closely through friends and other architects. You know, for instance, this whole idea of the transformation of the infrastructure, well, actually, the team of the university I was directing at the time got a direct commission to, you know, in association with the TVK, which was the engineering office, to actually implement it. And so this whole kind of reworking of the sections of the plantations and so forth, of the lightning, we actually did ourselves. And then, of course, was this fantastic situation whereby I was able to ask Manuel de Sola Morales to collaborate with us, and actually to, I mean, he being the executive architect, I the overlooking urbanist, whereby the project itself for the multimodal hub was actually designed by him. It would take us too far to go into this description, but I hope the photographs speak for themselves. But what I want to accentuate here is the fact that, well, this would never have been able to happen if we had not sort of a direct line, of course, with the client, the public client at the time, which was the city, the 4 public partners who were actually paying for the project. So this part of the multimodal hub, which, as you see, for those who don't know the project, has many sides and many aspects, and is extremely well designed and in its complexity. There were parts that were not, that were more or less forgotten in the sort of agreement we made between parties, and one of them was this underpassage to the under the tracks, which was essential though for the project. And the railway company had its own engineering office, and they insisted that they would do this. Well, happily, they had a very inexperienced young engineer on it who was only too keen that we would be of assistance. And through that, we were able actually to well, more or less design as a sort of a second-hand help the change of what you see is a very, very narrow underpass into what I think has become a rather successful street. I want to finish with two examples showing how important it is basically to keep on in the long term also to have this kind of monitoring. One is an example where this was not the case. So I left the project myself in 2002. The city sort of took over with other, you know, with some of my collaborators as earlier collaborators as advisors. Well, I'm not so happy with the way, for instance, that this infill was realized. It was much too dense in regard to what we had already foreseen. There was absolutely not enough sort of transparency. It became much more of a wall between the city and the one. So this is where we lost the battle in the of not monitoring. The other side, however, is extremely successful, in my opinion, by some coincidences. I was Flemish state architect when the new competition was launched, and I was able to contribute to well, having a very nice design selected by H+N+S and Archineering. And actually, I think that the project they made was better than the one that we originally foresaw, sort of a parkway, which you see on the left in the top. And underneath, you see the new section where the road was actually sort of dug in, which then sort of created this, as you see, dug in, and that created this elevation whereby the passing road is practically not even absent, and whereby, nicely enough, the tracks itself become part of the overruling landscape. So that for the Leuven project. The second one, the Ile de Nantes, well, it's a nice coincidence that Annemie explained you the whole project yesterday, so I don't want to go back into it and resume only to a sort of an infrastructure plan and sort of improved accessibility and the development that came part of it. And on the right, you already see, you know, a picture of this kind of new chronobus, this bus line number 5, C5, that is now running in Nantes in east-west direction, but has also caused the transformation of, allowed a transformation of one of the main east-west axes with the, you know, the creation of a lot of public areas. In general, you know, the whole idea of the Ile de Nantes has to do with a sort of a transformation of an initial industrial land that was basically determined by a north-south transit into what was called a metacentre, which really extended, let's say, the original centre-ville, the center of the town, and which would which would combine many kind of new facilities, activities, and large institutions, which were needed to be, had a great sense of centrality without being, a sort of killing the central city, because they stayed complementary. There were a few main design ideas which have to do with, for instance, one of the first is using the new university hospital as an attractor for a new urban mix of urban clusters around the metropolitan park. So this opposition, or this introduction of two large new elements that sort of mobilized both a number of activities, the university center, and of open air attributions is very essential. The other idea, of course, is the fact that the north-south throughways, which sort of divided up the island, would be changed by inserting the throughways into a grid of local main roads instead of throughways for service and distribution. So adding the east-west and lowering down the idea of the intensity and the capacity of the whole thing. Okay. With regard to that, there is an important element that I want to stress is this new junction, this introduction of a new passage between the two existing bridges. And the view that we proposed with Anami to have a sort of a parkway connecting it, and that this parkway would be an assemblage of the new functions at one element, but that it would also be marking two kind of different atmospheres, two kind of different urban landscapes. One, the more, let's say, built landscape of the metacentre and the hospital and so forth. And the other, let's say, the open park landscape with buildings in it, which would be at the point of the island in the Finisterre. In order to realize this metacentre and this new urban ambience, of course, you can only get to this kind of centrality if you realize an accessibility from the whole region. And if it's not to be by car, it needed a great impetus in the public transport. On the left, you see two pictures that Anami also projected yesterday, whereby, a very centripetal, organized public transport, that goes from the outskirts to the old historic center and back, is replaced by adding a few important grid elements, whereby actually instead of coming only into one point, we are now having a number of points of exchange between the lines, which means that we are dealing in transport terms with a network rather than with, let's say, a singular sort of meeting point. And this network, of course, creates a number of hubs which make it interesting in terms of accessibility to have the sort of central functions there in the first place, of course, the hospital itself. Now, what is important in this respect is that, of course, if you do this, you need to also invent the ways in which these hubs can work. And so this is, again, this idea of how do you go from an initial concept to to make it feasible, to make it, to have stakeholders believe that this is actually a possible solution. And so I'm showing these designs that maybe that most of the time UAPS has worked on, and to show, you know, this idea, for instance, of a plaza in front of an open air plaza in front of the hospital, which you see on the right, the top in the right, and maybe and also the section of the new road along the hospital, which of course by the new tramway had to breathe another atmosphere, which had to be decided and worked out. Now, because of course the hospital, building of the hospital and all that takes years and years, the first priority, of course, went to giving access and to improving the accessibility by public transport of those areas which you see here that were already built, which are really basically in the north of the island. And as you see in the Plan de Transformation, you know, this quartier de Prairie-au-Duc, you know, 3,000 inhabitants. And I'm joining a plan which we didn't draw, but it's just a plan of the Ligne 5 as it exists today, in order to show how this line sort of links, how this line sort of links the all these subsequent elements to the station, and then also realizes a sort of an east-west possibility of taking this bus line and this super fast bus line. And I'm showing you that, first of all, from left to right, from west to east, the successive ways in which, for instance, this line gave way to a new kind of public space. The first, you see this very nice aerial picture of what the quartier Prairie-au-Duc that is being built. And then, you know, in the middle, this axis, of course, which is actually the bus road, but is not only the free bus road, but it's really the central spine of the new area, with a number of you know, corner shops and so forth and so on, offices and etc. A little further, you know, in the existing area, which is really the older, somewhat poorer area that still is there, what we were able to benefit from is this kind of derelict spaces that were there because it was ancient, the train was also ancient going through them. And instead of just filling it, the idea was, of course, to keep it, use it both for the bus and for the bus and for the bikes, and as a sort of very rudimentary public space, which would, with very little means, at least be able to start the transformation of this poorer area into, as you see, the blue volumes are all part of proposed transformations in this area. And finally, maybe the more important one is this so-called Boulevard Vincent Gache, where, you know, the very great specificity was the existence of this sort of 20 meters wide former railway emplacement, which was only used for wild parking at the time, even though there had already been quite some renovations, some new buildings at the time. And what we suggested together with ProAP and UAPS was the idea of using this 20 meters wild parking to as an initiation to create some kind of zone, let's call it a sort of green corridor planted, but not only planted, a real civic use, give it a civic use, and use the idea of the necessity of having the bus line go through there to transform actually the whole transversal section. And again, this idea needed, of course, a lot of elaboration. It's not only a concept, it's how do you go from this concept, this is the original picture, as you see still, to the actual situation. It both enhances a sort of view of the kind of landscape that you want to incorporate, but also a view of the detailing, you know, that was originally foreseen, let's say, by João Nunes, but then really worked out in detail later by Annemie and UAPS and her group, in order to, you know, come to a result which you basically see here, as of a whole transformed section, whereby indeed this wild parking spaces were sort of sacrificed in order to bring the possibility of, you know, a new public use and a sort of new urban landscape, all thanks to these separate bus lanes in the middle that we needed in order to guarantee the accessibility. Now, of course, this would not have been possible. It was already very highly stressed yesterday by Annemie, without reaching the mandatory agreement of all stakeholders through intensive processes of co-creation. And I don't want to say more, but I cannot but enough stress this necessity. And I think that I would like to end with this, is that the nice thing is, of course, that there is a sort of a magnificent reaction, both of the citizens, but also of the market, in creating new developments, you know, in response to the reviewed accessibility and to the public space that is available there. And so this is Boulevard Vincent Gache, before the you know, the works, and you know, you have this corner place on the eastern side, which is the old Citroën garage and this old Brossette factory. Both of these areas have in the meantime been developed after plans that we made the feasibility studies for and so forth. We have no time to go into it, but the nice thing is that, in my view, you know, these reactions of the market, seeing new opportunities because of the improved accessibility, because of the enhanced quality of the public space, is rather exceptional. Finally, the last project that I would like to go in is a project that I've been able to monitor within the group I'm actually working for quite often now, or Urbanism, and which we undertook together with the Engineering Office of Tractebel and the Communication Office of Common Ground. Now, this, in contrary to the two first projects, in a way, this looks like it's more an open project, like it's more a landscape project, like it's in a way not part of the city, and yet it is very much so. What we are dealing with is this enormous kind of urban node at the south of Antwerp, part of the earlier motorway, and which was conceived solely as a highway, as a motorway network, and motorway spaghetti and solutions, and all, of course, all the problems that are stemming from them have to do with this attitude. Because you see, that not only the size, we are talking about 1 kilometer on 1.2 kilometers as a sort of a gap, an opening between the city center and its peripheral development. So it's a huge barrier. And at the same time, of course, it causes a lot of problems with relation to air pollution and so forth and so on. And so the city was not, for years, not very happy with it, had been working on how can we amend this situation? How can we sort of fill in with different kind of ideas and projects the edges of this open air area, and how can we re-establish certain links between the city and the outskirts, and on the other hand, how can we transform the capacity, the idea, the quality of this open space, and can we make it usable for the city instead of just being inaccessible? And while doing that, can we also improve the accessibility? Because this, you know, this need of creating the junction between the city center and the outskirts also made it possible that this Colonel Silvertop Avenue would become a very major link, because also it was sort of passing the railway line that was going from Antwerp to Ghent and the eastern cities, and that maybe we could develop a new station and a new sort of mobility hub between the one and the other. So when we were asked to intervene, there had already been a succession of unsuccessful projects trying to entangle the traffic node. I'm not entering in those, but you see, for instance, on the left, the existing situation, and then to the right, two proposals that were already studied in the air, one by an engineering office, the other by, let's say, the citizens' movement against that idea. But both proposals kept a serious number of drawbacks, and there was not really a conviction that either one was to be implemented. So the first important step for us was to devise a sound traffic concept built on reducing the spatial impact of the node and the car intensity on local roads. Without this traffic concept, you know, and proving that, of course, this node could do what it was initially created for, you know, be the intersection for heavy car traffic situation, it would have never been successful. So we sort of started, and I want to, you know, point your attention to the importance of these kind of exercises that were, of course, mainly done in conjunction with the engineering office. But basically, the idea is to make a sort of a scheme of what you are actually arriving at. And what you see is that we have the motorway in the middle, and then on the city side and also on the periphery side, we have three major roads sort of bringing in traffic to that node. And so the idea was, can we somehow concentrate this kind of apport, this kind of where the local traffic that is brought into the junction, can we concentrate it rather than disperse it, and winning some land by doing that? And what you see is that, for instance, these two existing proposals, if you put them on the same sort of sketch, they hardly realized many innovations. They just kept basically all the kind of roads as roads, as major traffic devices. And so what we said to ourselves, what we need to concentrate it into one traffic node, and then establish a situation whereby these two roads that are parallel with the motorway start acting as a sort of a collector roads for the traffic that comes in from the three other major roads bringing the traffic in, and that from these collector roads we then pass into the central junction, and which allows to reduce the traffic impact. So we proposed the scheme, but in order to first get the attention of the Ministry of Public Works that is paying for these implementations and revising the node, yeah, of course, you need to prove that it works. So we need to, the second step was to verify whether the traffic concept really met all the requirements of establishing fluid flows. But not only the flows. What is very important in this kind of node, and I showed you the element here in the little sketch, you know, there are 7 important interchanges. And all of these interchanges, of course, work together, one with the other, and, you know, and so the idea is, how do you calibrate in the right way this kind of interchange? How do you create efficient and viable interchanges? So first of all, by the flows that have to be taken care of, that determine the time of the green light and so forth, but that also determine the number of lanes that you need at each intersection. And not only today, but also something that you have to do is the sustainability of this element over time, where you see that the solutions that you suggest are indeed enough robust in order to take yeah, to gear coming growth even into good measures. Now that is one thing. That is, let's say that this idea basically gives way to the picture on the right, whereby you see a sort of computer montage of the sort of solution we basically suggested. But coming from that solution to actually the plan, which you see on the left, which is basically the final plan that has been accepted, is of course, again, taking both a very intensive rounds of negotiation and with the stakeholders, but also a very active process of design driven research of both very small elements. So the third step again here is, how do you develop the concept into a desirable prospective model? And by both this interchange with the stakeholders and the design-driven research on different scale levels. So what I would like to show you very quickly, because they are very essential, what you see actually in this kind of linking is this kind of prolongation of the inner city avenues with this kind of central axis that both goes to the motorway and then actually continues to the periphery as the main element for cars, liberating in this way the other existing street for public transport and bicycles, and creating another direct bicycle and pedestrian route in order to even improve the connection between central city and outskirts. this kind of new access, this new important central access, as you see, we even developed two models for that. One, the parkway, the other, the intermittent bossage. And I show this because they are gearing specific design solutions which have to be worked out, as well as to, you know, the sort of perception of this road they will create. Both in the left is, you know, each time you see the solutions of the parkway and the bossage, and also the way that this would be prospectively important, but also, you know, what is the impact of these solutions, for instance, on the different major interchanges, because they are, of course, the disruptions if you want to foresee a sort of a parkway. And so how can you sustain the idea that these interchanges would not work as interruptions? And what is then the implication in terms of parts of the motorway which you would have to cover extra, and of course the costs that are involved in it, and so forth. The second element is, you know, if you have this central axis here that goes from the city center, then the other road becomes really spared because there is much less or hardly any car traffic left, and so we can start working on the way in which the very intensive public transport, you see the number of tram lines left on top and the number of bus lines underneath that have to pass through this area. And you know, all the you know, these important two lines that really make it a major access for public transport, even creating the fact that that the interchanges for cars at certain points have to be organized in such a way that all these buses and trams have priority, but particularly leading to the fact that we actually get to a new kind of section which would allow to a new landscape to be made out of this public transport access, and which at its passage with the, you know, with the existing rail station, you see that at this kind of passage, this is of course an indicated spot for creating a sort of a new, not a central station, but a secondary station, which then would allow a very swift interchange between both tram, bus, bicycles, pedestrians, and trains, enhancing the possibility of course, creating more trains and completely changing the transport mode in the end, bringing many more people to the public transport. So I want to end with just giving illustrations of how these elements impact the quality of you know, the particular spaces, and how, you know, by illustrating this impact, we were of course also able to convince the stakeholders as such. So the first element that I want to show is by moving up, because there is an existing road, you see it here actually, and by moving up this kernel, you know, the General Armstrong, all of these roads have military names, very strange, of course, because of course initially it was the bastions of the city. And by moving up this road towards the motorway, you create the possibility of a large area. The second is by not allowing in the last piece the car traffic, but by bringing the car traffic to this Colonel Armstrong Way and then to the motorway, you liberate this very important dwelling area, and you make the possibility of joining the dwelling with its all amenities, sports fields, school campuses, and so forth. The third, of course, is how in this this kind of armpit of the new development here at the southern part of the central city, how do you join two spaces that are empty by by concentrating the road and being able to cover it in this and then finally, how do you use, or how do you use this new pedestrian road in order to liberate this kind of huge area, which is also one, this ortus conclusus, as I call it, and cover part of the railway. So number one is the initial situation of this Armstrong Road and of the motorway you see here. Well, if you move the Armstrong Road up there, you gain about more than 100 meters of surface, and you create, of course, a sort of slow berm, which then makes both the motorway invisible, but also takes away a lot of the noise. And so you get this kind of berm park, which of course greatly improves the living area of the neighboring sports parks and so forth. The other is this road, the Emil Vloorlaan, which now is on one side is sort of a 1960s modernist development, social housing basically, and then schools and sports fields and so forth on the other side. And the traffic doesn't really allow to go from one to the other. The fact that we divert the traffic also allows to change the actual section, which you see on top, into a new section, which you see down, and whereby, of course, the landscape, which is existing now, look at the photograph top on the right, it can be really transformed into a new peaceful landscape, which basically is only leaving, possibility for local roads and for basically a sort of important new tram line that is crossing the area. Third element is what I told you in this armpit of the development in the south of the central city, where you have these existing spaghetti road, parts of the spaghetti, which completely cover and make impossible to use the actual site as such by concentrating, by bringing the two roads, the four roads into two roads together. We liberate a lot of land, but we also make it possible to cover these parts, at least in a large section, whereby the one park and the other park are basically joined into a large area used for these dwellings around it, well, the apartments around it. And finally, this kind of new connection, which is quite important because it's just for pedestrian and cycles, and it sort of experiences a new sort of connection through the park, which is of course highly different from the connection in this public transport road, but is also of course shortening the way for quite a number of people, rather essential. Doing that on the way, it sort of liberates or makes accessible this ortus conclusus, in which sort of idea of open air exposition of as an extension of Middelheim Park was foreseen. And then of course we have to cover the motorway, and then there is studies about what would be the impact of a 40-meter versus a 60-meter coverage, the costs, but also, let's say, the sound and the potential for use and so forth and so on. That is being accepted. Now, we are at the stage now, this project, what had to be finished quite quickly, in a sense that we finished it in less than six months in 2020. And, you know, then you start wondering why it was possible to do that. And I think we have to mention a few conditions again, you know, that led to the swift acceptance of this project. The first was the shared dissatisfaction of the city and the ministry with the two earlier proposed alternatives. So they welcomed another one, especially if it was better. The second element was the strict deadline set forward by the Ministry of Public Works, because it risked to lose its budget if we did not meet the deadline, and they didn't want to see the money go to waste, so they wanted us to succeed. The third was the capacity that we showed of solving a complex infrastructural problem while providing ample landscape improvements and upgrade amenities for neighboring districts. So how do you transform a traffic node and create a win-win situation for people and inhabitants around it? And the last part was an important co-creation process with all the stakeholders. And I'm showing these last pictures because I, say that I showed that the left is another project that we did in Antwerp, and a sort of a scene of the co-creation processes there, which of course were all around the table and so forth. Because of the pandemic, in this case, we were not able to sit together in a room. So we had to do everything on Zoom. And even there, we proved to ourselves that this was possible for, of course, a number of the reasons I enumerated above. And I hope I was able to do just as well on Zoom with you today and this morning, and that I have been able to make myself clear enough to strengthen the debate. Thank you very much for listening to me from this distance.
Thank you, Marcel. It's been so nice to have you here in Oslo and discussing with you about the infrastructure and as architecture. And before going further with Franco Ghilardi, I would just like to reflect on some of what we have been discussing on. And thank you for bringing up the infrastructure as the public infrastructure, not only as a problem, but also as an opportunity of restructuring the city, and also as an opportunity of an integrated design as in the fabric of the city, as landscape and as architecture. And from a Norwegian point of view, this is, I think, very needed and interesting to reflect on. But when you have been working on this, on the infrastructure integrated, dealing with the scale, dealing with the infrastructure as barrier, rescaling it into the urban tissue, and working with it on the scale of the project, of the cross section, but also on an overall perspective, on the overall organization of the city. in the design team, the collaboration with the traffic engineers, but also with the public traffic authority. How has that been? How is this? How did you deal with that?
Well, it depends on which project, you know, but I wanted to stop with the last one, because it usually in our normal practice in many countries in the world, this kind of revision of pure traffic nodes is completely dealt with by engineering companies. And so what we established is a very close collaboration with, you know, Tractebel and ourselves as urban designers. Of course, what helped was, to be very honest, that, you know, the person who worked with Tractebel and guided the team there, Frank van Hulle, well, he's also an architect and an engineer. He's a former student of mine, and so we of course understood each other very well, and we were talking about the same things. And in a way, he was guiding his engineers to obtain the kind of results that we both ambition, you know. So it was not just an engineer that was, or neither Frank nor I were content with, you know, engineers that would say, well, this doesn't work, you know. So we would start and try to suggest solutions which had to be studied again, whether they would be possible and so forth. And of course, in the quarter of an hour I've been talking about it now, it's practically impossible to convey this complexity. But I can assure you that there is many more kind of studies done in order to achieve this result than of course I have shown here, you know. But very essential, in my opinion, is the fact that that first of all, this collaboration with the engineers, but then at the same time, the need also with the citizens and with the different administrations of coming to a result, you know, both because the budget would otherwise be lost, but also because this was an ongoing problem for such a long time, and people were fed up with it, you know. And when you then finally showed that this could bring so much new potential, you know, for the neighboring areas, you know, this was like a relief, a sort of collective sigh, you know. And well, this is, I think, an important condition that you have to try and achieve also when you design, is to bring a sort of collective eagerness, to establish an eagerness which would allow to achieve things that are otherwise impossible, you know. Never give up.
Thank you. And I was also just a comment on that. And it's so nice to see how you both respect the functionality of the infrastructure, but also the perception across the infrastructure. So it's not longer perceived as a barrier, like the integrated design of Leuven. And I always like how going from Leuven to Kesselo, you don't have the perception of that barrier anymore. And also creating this opportunity of a new centrality where before was a barrier. And I think, yeah, I think that in Norway and in this, and also when the discussion in the studio together with you, this have been really nice to perceive. Yeah. But from Marcel was also in the scientific committee of European, and before and now we will go further on with Franco Ghilardi, but who won the first European competition in Oslo, I think. So then it's this link between you. I think you know each other. But first, thank you, Marcel. It was really nice
listening
to you again.
for giving me the floor.